Today's Final Fantasy deck we're going to be talking about is Warriors. And I think Warriors is one of the best mid-range decks you could be playing right now in the meta. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Water Fire variant. I think it's just the best variant of Warriors you could be playing. You could go to a mono fire route. You could go to a fire earth route. If you want to be really spicy, you can go into a 4-color route, but that's a discussion for another day. We're going to talk about the Water Fire route, giving you all the great aspects and removal options of fire cards while giving you the draw power, utility, and recursion that a few of the water cards can get you. So as always, we're going to be talking about my current list that I have been playing in events and seeing a fair amount of success with. I'll talk about some flex spots, what things I run that you can maybe take out, what cards you could consider putting into the deck. Afterwards, we'll get into some common combos, get into your mulligans, what you want to be doing in your first couple turns, some neat combos, and some more interesting rulings and stuff to watch out for. And then finally, at the end, we'll get into matchups and what you should be probably doing against some of the more popular decks being played right now. So without further ado, let's get into it. So here is the deck list that I've been currently running with for a while. I've been making some small changes here and there, pulling cards out, putting cards back in. You kind of adapt with what you think is going to be played at the events you're going to. But let's get into the core of the list here. We're going to go into everything. So if you know absolutely nothing about the Warriors deck, you're going to know a lot more now. So we'll start with the main engine of the deck, which is Tyvis. So you always want to be playing 3 Tyvis. This is the, one of the biggest pieces of your deck. This makes the whole world go round. Tyvis gets to search for a warrior whenever he's played, and then he has an action ability for 0. You can play a warrior of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. So we're going to be playing a lot of the warriors that are cost 3 or less, so we can capitalize on that free play. But Tyvis is kind of the main piece that makes the whole deck go round. So working into the other forwards, we have 3 Furion. Furion is another one of the main cards of the deck. Furion, if you have 5 or more characters, gains haste, and when he attacks, you get to draw a card. So Furion keeps your hand size up. He keeps you gaining advantage. He also has an action ability where you can discard a card, and he gains 2,000 power. If it's a fire card, he gains first strike. If it's a water card, it activates him. Note, if it's a water fire card you discard, like say another Furion, he'll gain 4,000 power, first strike, and activate. So the abilities will stack if the card is a water and a fire card. So Furion becomes this body that you get to attack with, you get to draw, and a lot of the time your opponent doesn't want to block it because unless they really want to try and make you discard a lot of cards, they always have to be afraid that you're just going to discard a water fire card and make it 9k first strike. So it kind of makes it this pseudo unblockable forward that's constantly giving you advantage. So Furion is a card you always want to be trying to get on the board and using to your advantage. Another one of our warriors, we have Yuzuki, another water fire card. Yuzuki is very crucial in certain matchups because Yuzuki says when a fire forward you control dealt damage, that becomes 0. So that becomes really important, especially in matches where, we'll say the mirror match, where they're using a lot of fire cards that do a lot of damage. That damage becomes 0. Or even in something like Refia, where they're using Ferris, that damage from Ferris becomes 0. Also, if a water forward's dealt damage, you get to reduce it by 2,000. That doesn't come into effect a lot, but it's still important because it makes your Furion even harder to block and deal with effectively. So note, it's also a warrior of the cost 3, so it's playable off Tyvis. We're going to go through all the warriors first so you can see what they do and why you'd want to play them on certain occasions. Our next warrior is Mog. I have this at a 2 right now. I think it's pretty solid at 2. You really want to be seeing this card a lot. When Mog enters the field, he draws a card, so he's one of your warriors that gets to replace himself, which is really important at keeping hand size going. And then Mog, you can put it in the break zone, and your opponent can't search this turn. So you can do that in response to your opponent playing a card that searches something, and it just negates the card, basically. Really important in a lot of the matchups where your opponent wants to search. You know, Refia cards like Realm searches and plays them onto the field. There's a lot of instances of search, and Mog just shuts them down completely on a pseudo free body, because if you just play this off Tyvis, you give up a card in hand and he draws you a card, so it's essentially free. Our next one is Axstar. Axstar is extremely good in this deck, very important. Note he's fire ice, so he's difficult to play on his own. You would have to discard another copy of Axstar. 99.9% of the time you're playing this off of Tyvis, but Axstar gets 3 abilities when he enters the field. And we'll get into this, the intricacies of Axstar later and what you can do with those 3 abilities. But you get the dull freeze, everything that's not cost 3. You get to play a cost 3 of fire or ice, and then you get to do 3k for each cost 3 you control. Now you get to play something of 3 or less. So you can maybe go Tyvis, and then you can play Axstar, and then you can play Furion on the side of it. And then you'll have your Furion to be able to swing. This helps you really gain board advantage, but mainly the important thing about Axstar is he dull freezes things that aren't cost 3. So there's a lot of matchups where they're not running cost 3s. We'll say something like an Earth deck where they're all really high costed, and Axstar just freezes them all. You can also look at a deck like Yuna, which really wants to be dulling its forwards constantly to be keeping you down. Or even something like Knights, where they're, again, small bodies that they want to be dulling for Ramza effect and swinging, and Axstar can just shut him down for a turn, giving you a chance to rebuild. So Axstar is extremely important in this deck and is very good. Our next warrior here is Ward. Ward enters the field, deals something 7,000 damage. Pretty simple. It has an EX burst, which is nice. This is a really cool card to play off of Axstar because you can play the Axstar, deal damage to one thing, you get to play the ward off the Axstar, deal damage to another thing, and you can really clear out a board while establishing these bodies. Important note that ward, you can only pay with fire CP to play ward. That comes up more often than you'd think, and you have to keep that in mind, especially not playing a mono fire variant. Another warrior I want to talk about here is Riku. Now, this is a personal preference. Some people don't like to run the Riku. I love to run the Riku, but it's not a fire or water card, so I get it. But Riku gets to play a backup of 3 or less onto the field when she enters. So Riku is a nice way to be able to really extend your board, that you can play Tyvis, search the Riku, play the Riku for free. Riku can play a backup for free, and that gets you a pretty decent amount of advantage. And we'll get into later what kind of 3-cost backups you could play off Riku, but you can stack together some pretty cool combos with this Riku with 3 CP backups. But it is a nice way to start getting numbers on your board, because you do want to be hitting those 5 characters, so Furion can be getting the haste draw card, because the quicker you can be drawing cards off Furion, the better you'll be in the long run. So that's it for the warriors, but we do play some non-warrior cards because you still need some utility. So the first card we'll look at is Zidane. This man needs no introduction. Zidane is a 2 CP haste, can't be blocked by 4 to 3 or more. When he hits the field, you get to look at your opponent's hand, and you get to remove from game one of their cards. You could do that when he enters or when he attacks. Now, it is a fire wind card, so it is hard to cast on its own. We have ways we can play Zidane through our backups. Note that he is counted as a fire forward, so Zidane is also playable off of Axstar, that comes up pretty relevant. So this card is very important, though. It really can disrupt, especially the slower control style decks that are out there where you'll lose in the long run, having a Zidane to disrupt them early really can set you at an advantage. Some people do like to play the Zidane at 3. I've gone back and forth with it. I kind of want to, but the deck space is very tight, and we'll get into a little bit of that later when I start talking about what you can put in and what you can remove. The next card we'll talk about is Cloud. I love this card. Cloud, when he enters the field, you get to do 2 of these things that is written on him. You could deal something 8,000 damage. You can break a monster. You can remove from play 2 cards in your opponent's break zone, or you can play a category 7 character from 4 or less onto the field. You don't have a lot of options in Fire Water for breaking monsters and removing cards in your opponent's break zone from the game. Two actions which are really relevant. So Cloud is a way to do both of those things. I rarely have ever found a case where it felt bad to play this card. You always have some line where it feels good to play Cloud, be it remove from play 2 things on their field and blow something up, blow something up, break a monster. Because you have options, Cloud just always feels like he gets his value and is 100% worth playing. I have seen people take this card down to 1, but I really like it at 2. So that's Cloud. And our final forward we'll talk about, maybe the most important forward in the game, Clive Rossfield. So if you're unfamiliar with Clive, he is a 4 CP with haste. When he deals damage, you get to discard your hand and draw 2. And then for fire in 1, or for 2 CP, you can prime him into Ifrit. So Ifrit is our 7 CP haste. He deals 10,000 on entry. He deals 10,000 whenever you deal damage. I have had games where I say I'm playing Mono Clive. The card is just so good on its own. You can win games by just playing Clive, priming, and just going crazy with Clive. He's so great for board control. The special being able to discard to deal something 10,000 damage is very relevant. And this is like, other than Tyvis, this is the easiest other like 3 of card in the deck. So that takes care of our forwards. Well, I'm going to get into this one card because it's a pseudo forward, but I run 1 Phoenix. So Phoenix is a monster that deals 9,000 damage whenever it enters the field, and then you can remove from play 4 cards from your break zone to play it, to animate it, to make it a forward for the turn. First off, having a 9,000 damage, just do 9,000 to something, it is very relevant at times. It can be difficult to do 9,000 damage at times, and there are some bodies, we'll say like Ramza in Knights, which is difficult to remove sometimes, So Phoenix helps you get there, but more importantly, it is a body that is very difficult to remove at times. Having a forward that's just sitting off to the side where your opponent can't touch it most of the time until you're ready to animate it and get it in there for some damage is really good. We don't care about our break zone too much. So there's only a small amount of break zone recursion. So you do have the freedom to start removing cards from your break zone from the game for Phoenix to start dealing points of damage. I like the Phoenix. I think it's worth playing. I like having that monster in the deck. Now, getting into our summons, I currently am running 7 summons. First one, the most obvious one, Amaterasu. 3 CP, cancel an auto ability, deal 8,000 to a forward if it triggered it. This card's just necessary. It almost just needs no explanation. It's just your disruptor. it is necessary in so many matchups in disrupting your opponent. And in certain matchups like Mono or Earth, you don't even need it for the forward. You just need it to stop like a Shantoto backup. So Amat, really great. 3 of. The next one is Kuchulain. Another, you need it at 3. Choose a forward, it loses all abilities and draw a card. There's just an infinite amount of things in the game you want to lose abilities. You can make opposing Ifrits lose abilities. You can make Refias and Ferrises lose abilities before they do things. You can make Yuna lose its abilities before you start going crazy so they can't tax you. Kuchulain is just, and it's a burst. I mean, it's perfect. And finally, I'm gonna one of Salamander. So this card kind of comes in and out over time, but sometimes you just need a board wipe. And more importantly, a lot of the times you need something that's not a forward-based removal. That's why I like Phoenix, and Salamander helps with that as well. Sometimes they have things like Salamander is not forward-based, and it is not targeting, which is really important. Sometimes they have things that like can remove your forwards, that can deal with your forwards, and you really just need to move stuff off the board. Salamander helps, especially in these matchups with little small bodies like Knights, like Yuna. Being able to just deal 5,000 to the whole board and cleave it all out is really important. You can remove 10 fire cards in your break zone when you cast this to deal 7,000 to everything, which can be relevant at times. I don't find myself hitting that threshold super often though, but it is nice to have the option to do so. Okay, so finally we'll get into our backups. And the first backup, it's hard to say which is more important, but I'm going to start with Larsa. Larsa I have at 3. When Larsa enters the field, search for a forward that costs 4 or more. Larsa will 99.9% of the time be searching you Tyvis or Clive, mostly Tyvis. This is your opener. You always want to be trying to just play Larsa and search the Tyvis. That's why it's here at 3 of. Because it is just the most consistent way you can start the game is to Larsa for a Tyvis. So, but you may sometimes play the Larsa to search a Clive or an Ifrit to use the special with. I have done that before. So don't tunnel vision. I almost said when I first showed this card, like, oh, pretend it says search a Tyvis. That can get, you can tunnel vision on that sometimes. You're like, Larsa is my Tyvis searcher. But Larsa can search you other things too. He can search you, like I said, something to use an Ifrit special. So Larsa, very good card though. I don't think I'd ever take this down from 3 at the moment. The other backup is Lena. Larsa, Lena, 2 of the, I think, the best backups in the game right now. When your opponent uses an EX burst, you draw a card. That's really important in matchups like Refia, for example. But also you have Raise, which is you could choose a 4 to 3 or less in your break zone and play it dull. We have a lot of cost 3 or lesses, and one of them is extremely relevant and important to bring back a lot of the time, and that is Mog. So with Mog and Lena, you can like wait till they try and search something, and then Lena special to bring back the Mog. Then you get to draw a card, and then you break the Mog to cancel their search, which they don't expect a lot of the time because they don't see the Mog on the board. So Lena is just, that raise is super helpful. You can also raise an Axstar if you need to dull freeze their whole board. Lena, and plus it's a burst. This card has everything. It's nuts. Another snap 3 of. Going down the line in other backups, Selfie. I love this backup. You get, when Selfie enters the field on the burst, you get to add a fire forward back to your hand. Honestly, a lot of the time, this is adding back a Clive to use the special again. But it's super nice to just say, oh, 4 CP to do 10,000 to something. Selfie also can get the action ability to break herself to give something 3,000 power. doesn't come into effect too often, but it's nice to have, and people do forget about it. I'd run this card at more copies, but there's just not a lot of room for more. But Selfie's amazing. The next one I play is Security Officer. So Security Officer, when he enters the field, you get to deal 5,000 damage to something, or you can draw a card. And one of the important things about Security Officer is that he is a Category 7 card. So that gets into our relevant text on Cloud, which says you can play a Category 7 character. So we'll get into that in a second, but he's also cost 3. So he's playable off of Riku. So at his worst, he's a 3CP backup that draws a card, right? And he can also, at his best, be free played off of Riku or Cloud, so that you just get a free play draw a card. But you also can deal 5,000 damage to something instead of drawing the card. Sometimes that's relevant against like Yuna or Knights, which is, sometimes you have to get the Laswell off the field a lot of the time. Security Officer can help with that. That gives you the option with Cloud to be able to pay 5 to play the Cloud and then remove 2 things from the break zone, draw a card, and then play a Category 7 onto the field, Security Officer, and draw another card. So Cloud gets to play a backup, remove from play 2 things, and draw 2 cards, which is a crazy amount of value. So Security Officer is a fantastic card. I do love it. Okay, so our next backup we're going to talk about is Edgar. So this is where we start getting into where I said we're going to start seeing the value out of Riku. So when Edgar enters the field, you can play a character of cost 2 or less onto the field. That lets us play our Lena. That lets us play our Furion, and that lets us play our Zidane, which is another way we can get the Zidane onto the field. So, again, at his worst, it's a 3CP backup that can play Furion, Zidane, or Lena. At his best, you can play Tyvis, search Riku, you can play the Riku, you can play the Edgar, and then you can play the Furion, which is a lot of value for 0 CP. And then you get to attack with the... So like your one of your big combos is like going Larsa for Tyvis, and then Tyvis, Riku, Edgar, Furion, swing, draw a card, because you have 5 characters. I used to run the Sarah backup to search Edgar to kind of guarantee that play a little more, but I started to feel like I don't like Sarah right now in the format, so I just play the Edgar. If you draw it, cool, you do the play. If you don't, you just do other things. But it's still very relevant. He also has the action ability to play a character of cost 2 from your hand onto the field, so you can break him later to play a Zidane. It gives you lots of ways to play the Zidane, which is really nice. The next one is Loporrit. So this was a very recent ad for me, but I don't know why I wasn't playing this before. When Loporrit enters the field, you get to draw 2 cards, and then you get to put 1 card from your hand onto the bottom of your deck. Then, for an action ability of 2 and break itself, you can do it again. Why I love Loporrit so much is it lets you put Ifrits back on the bottom of your deck so you can prime. I can tell you how many games I had played before I put Loporrit in. I couldn't tell you how many games where I would draw all 3 Ifrits and go, oh, cool, I guess I'm just not priming this game. Loporrit gives you a way to get that playline back, because that playline is very, very strong, and losing the ability to prime is kind of really detrimental sometimes. Our final 2 backups, we have Moody. Moody searches for a fire summon. It's as simple as that. Moody searches for Amat. Moody's also cost 3, so Moody can be played off of the Riku. So you can go Tyvis, Riku, Moody, search the Amat so you can disrupt their first turn and pass, which is really, really strong on its own. I really like Moody to be able to search the Amat, because sometimes you just really need it. And our final backup is Garland. So I love this backup. When Garland enters the field, you get to take control of one of your opponent's forwards for this turn. This has 2 kind of things to it. One, you can take control of their blocker so that you get to swing in for like Inifrit to deal 10,000 to stuff, or to swing for game, those sorts of things. You could take control of an opponent's Tybus and then use its effect, which is super cool. The main combo piece of this comes in with the Limit Break deck, which we'll get into the Limit Break deck after this. But super cool backup, very awesome. All right, so finally, let's get into the Limit Break deck. So the first Limit Break card we have is Zac. Is 1. Zac deals 3,000 damage. Very basic effect, but it is helpful with Axstar because Axstar deals damage based on the number of cost 3 forwards you control. So you can play a Zac, deal 3,000 to something, then play the Axstar to finish something off. So that's super helpful. To Leo. It's Leo. It's a 3 CP LB that draws a card. It helps you, like I said, it helps you filter your hand. It helps you hit that 5 character count for Furion, which is super helpful. And it's a cost 3 forward, which helps Axstar hit his numbers. The next one we have is Graf. So Graf works with the Garland. When Graf enters the field, you have to remove one of your forwards from the game. You choose a forward, then remove it from the game. So if you Garland something and you take one of their forwards, you can then Graf and remove it from the game. It's super cool. Oh, and then Graf also, when he attacks, makes something lose 4,000 power, which is relevant. He's also a cost 3 for Axstar. We have Red 13. Now, this is another personal preference. You don't have to run Red 13 in your Limit Break deck. But this card can win games. Red 13 says, if you control 3 Category 7 forwards, he gains Haste, First Strike, Brave, and then all your forwards gain 2,000 power. So we don't have a lot of Category 7 forwards, but we have Cloud, and that's enough. Because you can have Cloud, and then you can LB Zac, LB Red, and you've hit the threshold. Just giving you a nice 9k Haste, First Strike, Brave to just poke for the final point of damage. Next we have Tidus. So Tidus doesn't get played super often, but when it gets played, you feel like it's needed. Tidus 5 CP, you can pay 3 more, and if you have 8 or more forwards or backups together combined, you can bottom deck a forward, top deck a backup, and draw 2 cards. So this is super helpful against decks that are trying to ramp their backups up to 4 to 5 backups. Things that want to play like the 4-cost Warrior of Light. Tidus helps set them back really hard, especially in the late game when they're done playing backups and they've discarded them all. Then you can just Tidus one out of the way, and then it really sets those slow control decks back. We have a Vincent, another Category 7 forward LB for the Red 13. Vincent, you can put a fire backup into the break zone to deal something 9,000 damage. Again, sometimes you really just need to deal damage to something, and sometimes it has more than Ward can handle. So being able to just 9,000 something to move something out of the way is really important. And finally, one of the most powerful LBs in the deck, Ultima Weapon. Ultima is a fire water LB that if you control 4 fire characters, including itself, you get to deal something 9,000 damage. And then if you control 4 more water characters, they select a forward and put it into the break zone. This is really helpful because we have a lot of water and fire cards in Furion, in Yuzuki, in itself. So hitting this threshold of 4 fire and 4 water is pretty easy, and he becomes this 6 CP LB that just removes 2 things off the board. He's also helpful with things like, that are really hard to remove on their own, because the water effect says they put it into the break zone. You don't have to choose it. So if it can't be chosen by effects, you can just make them put it in the break zone. Now, the important thing with Ultima Weapon, these are 2 separate auto abilities. And the fire auto ability, you have to choose on activation. Okay, so when you play the card, you choose what you're dealing 9,000 damage. The water effect happens at resolution. So it's important when you play Ultima Weapon to stack your abilities so that the fire ability is resolving first. Because if you resolve the water ability first, they can select what you chose for 9,000 damage. So if you stack it so that the water ability goes first, you choose something, and then they put something in the break zone, they'll put what you chose. If you stack it the other way, you choose something, that dies first, then they have to select something else and put it into the break zone. So it's just an important little ruling thing to keep in mind when you're playing Ultima Weapon. So that is the main core of the deck that I'm currently playing right now. So we'll get into a few kind of ratios, cards you can add, cards you can take out. Some of the first immediate things that come to mind, we'll start with backups. You don't have to play the Garland. I kind of recommend it, but you don't have to play the Garland. You don't have to play the Edgars. You can swap out the Moody. Like a lot of this, the only things I'd say you really need, you need 3 Larsa, you need 3 Lena. Those are like, I wouldn't take those out for the world. But some backups you can consider, you could consider this Red 13, which is a warrior, so it can be played off Tyvis. I don't like to play the warrior backups because it's very rare that I want to use my Tyvis ability to play a backup. This deck wants to apply a lot of pressure 90% of the time. And using your Tyvis ability to play a backup doesn't help a lot. Red 13 is nice though, because you can play red and discard cards to deal stuff 7,000 damage. He can be a good way of just like clearing your opponent's board so you can go in for game. This card comes in and out for me, you know. It was also super helpful when people used to play like Sid Randall as a way to answer that card, but that card's not really in favor right now. But it's a consideration. Like I said, this is a card that comes in and out for me a lot of the time. Another backup you could consider is Joseph. So Joseph is a 3 CP burst that searches a rebel. Your rebel is Furion. That is a good rebel to search. It's 3 CP, so it's playable off the Riku, and it's a burst. So another card that I always consider, it's just trying to find the room for it is difficult. I have seen some people run the 4 CP Saz backup. It searches for a fire summon. It does what Moody does, but this one's on a burst. I don't particularly like this. I like having Moody with the synergy off Riku. And I don't know. It's just, I'd rather have the 3 CP backup than a 4 CP one with a burst. You're not really shooting for the bursts here, and I don't like to add a card into my deck just hoping that I hit it off burst. Important thing to note I didn't point out in my LB, there is no Luna Freya in my LB. We're playing 10 EX bursts in the deck. You're not super likely to hit the burst thing off of Luna Freya. And I feel like a lot of the time, if you're using Luna Freya to dig for like a Tyvis or something, you're so far out of the game. I just don't like Luna Freya in this deck. That's your flex option for LB. You could put a Luna Freya in here. You know, it probably has its games where it comes in handy. You can dig for a special for each or something. I just don't like it. But some other things you can consider in the summon lineup. You could consider playing the 5 CP Bahamut, which is reduced by 2 during your turn, and then you deal something 10,000 and remove it from the game. This pairs well with Moody because Moody says when you cast Bahamut, you can activate Moody. So it kind of discounts Bahamut even further. Having something that removes from game the forward is super nice. And 10,000 damage is a relevant number. So that one is a consideration in the summon lineup. Another thing you can consider is Brynhildr. Another card that comes in and out of my deck very frequently. Brynhildr deals 5,000 damage to something. If it's put into the break zone, you get to draw a card. This card's really good at dealing with things like knights, like dealing with Yuna. It is a very, very relevant card. The problem, why I say it comes in and out of my deck, is it doesn't help super often outside of those decks in this deck. And some Knights decks are opting to play things like Ovelia now, which put all their Knights at 6,000, which makes Brynhilder a lot less useful. So this is one of those ones that's like, you know, based on what if you're expecting to see a lot of Knights and Yuna, it's probably worth playing the Brynhilder. If you're expecting to see a lot of Refia and Mono Earth and Water Lightning monsters, Brynhilder might not get you there as much. Let's see, what other things? So, again, like I said, the Riku is a personal pick for me. You don't have to play the Riku. Riku can make room for your third Zidane. Riku can make room for other things, like, we'll start with the obvious one, Volker. Volker is, I just added it to my deck. All right, sure. Volker is a new warrior that they printed. When he enters the field due to your cast, you can search for 2 warriors down into your hand. Then your next one costs 3 less. Then when a warrior dies, you deal 4,000 damage to something. So I like Brynhilder in combination with Volker because Volker can deal 4,000 to something, and then Brynhilder can deal 5 to it and finish it off. So you could trade up to like 9,000 damage power forwards. I like Volker. I just never find the room for it because he's kind of always... Volker to me was only ever useful when I had a Tyvis on board and I just needed to search for like an X-Star. He just was a 4th Tyvis essentially. And I just didn't feel like... I don't feel like the deck, the Water Fire version, has the room for a 4th Tyvis. Well, if I can play a 4 Tyvis, I'd play 4 Tyvis. But this one costs 7 and can be modded, which doesn't feel as good. You have to put a lot of investment into Volker, into an 8,000 power forward. The card is very good. Like I said, I just don't know if it has a home in this deck, but it is a consideration you can play. Like I said, if you're not playing the Riku, you have an open spot. If you don't play the Phoenix, you have an open spot. Volker is like pretty high on my list of like, doesn't hurt to have it in there. Another thing you could consider, maybe if you wanted to cut down on the clouds, you could consider the demon as a way to remove their break zone from the game, because the demon removes the entire break zone from the game, which is very relevant. The demon also can cleave whole jobs or whole elements. So that can be really good against like being able to call knights to hit all their little knights, to be able to hit certain jobs like Scions or Warriors of Light maybe. I think Cloud's targeted removal is enough, but I could see the argument for playing the demon because it is a really scary body that's hard, that is like one of those remove immediately kind of forwards. Another card you could consider for the deck, another one I don't fully believe in, but you could look at Iron Eater. Iron Eater does what Ward does, but it does 8,000 damage if you have 5 or more warriors in your break zone. He doesn't have the burst, and so here's my problem with Iron Eater. He doesn't have the burst, and your opponent can play around it. If they have Mist Dragon or something to remove your break zone in response to Iron Eater, he won't do the 8,000 damage. So you have to be careful if you want to play Iron Eater. But I feel like most of the time, the 7,000 damage from Ward is enough. 7,000 is usually a nice sweet spot for killing forwards that are super relevant enough. And if you play it off of X-Star, you can finish it off in that way. You have Zac to finish stuff off. So I wouldn't worry too hard about Iron Eater, but you can consider it as a one of. I think it's definitely something you could consider. So that kind of goes over the main deck and how we would kind of build the deck, construct it, and kind of edit it. So now we will jump over to the playmat, and we're going to go into some combos and rulings and such that are important to keep in mind while you play the deck. So let's talk about some of the specifics of the deck. Some combos, rulings, mulligans, whatever. And I think we'll talk about that first, which is your mulligans and your opening hand. So when going for your opening hand in this deck, you're really looking for one of two things. The first is Larsa. Almost any hand with Larsa you would keep. So we have Larsa and 4 other cards, and you would keep this hand. So the only time I would say maybe you don't keep a Larsa is if we'll take this Firion out. And I'm going to take the security officer out. Would maybe be a hand like this, because you don't have a source of water CP to play the Larsa. And it's not worth risking trying to draw it, because if you draw for turn and it's that, your opening play now becomes discard 3 for Cloud, or your opening play sucks. So the only time I say you don't keep a Larsa is if there's no good play other than the Larsa in your hand. If this hand had, say, security officer in it, then you could risk it, because you could say, okay, if I don't draw the water card, I can play the security officer as my turn 1 play. It's not the end of the world. The other hand that you want to keep in this deck, if you don't see the Larsa, is Tyvis and a backup. The backup doesn't matter. It can be the Lena. It can be the that's Salamander. It can be the security officer. Because then it doesn't matter what your other 3 cards are. When you draw for turn, you have a way to go discard for water, play the Lena, draw for turn, and then next turn you can discard 2 cards and play the Tyvis, right? And then start going. So those are your biggest things for Mulligan in a generic sense. I'm going to get into specific matchups here in a little bit. So as I said, your main curve in this deck, as we'll call it, your main curve is, say this is our opening hand, and we draw for turn. Your main curve when playing this deck is to prioritize, if this were my hand, I would discard the Furion for water and maybe the Salamander to play the Larsa. The Larsa searches a 4 to cost 4 or more. We would search the Tyvis. And then I would draw for turn. Next turn, untap the Larsa. I would tap the Larsa. I would discard a Cloud. And I don't know. Maybe the Ward. And we would play the Tyvis onto the field. Tyvis would search you a Mog to hand. Then you'd use Tyvis effect. You would play the Mog and draw a card. This is your typical first 2 turns in this deck. In a very generic, say you don't know what your opponent's playing, you're not used to the matchup, or, it's just a deck where this is what you want to do. Like, this is usually your go-to. So, you want to keep that in mind as you're starting to play the deck, is that's kind of a typical what you want to do going first, in a generic sense. So the next thing I want to talk about is, I mentioned when we were talking about things in the deck list about like the Riku combo you can do. And how that kind of entails is like, so you play your Larsa. We'll throw some cards in our hand, right? So we're gonna play our Larsa to go get the Tyvis, and we would have one less card. And so how you usually evaluate this is you need, if you have the Edgar and a card to play off of it, then your next turn play, if the Riku's not in your hand, So that the time you search for the Riku is if you have Edgar and another card in your hand. That way, next turn when you draw, you can discard these, you can play the Tyvis, search the Riku, play the Riku off Tyvis, Riku gets to play the Edgar, and then Edgar gets to play the Furion, and then you get to go to combat and attack because you have 5 characters, and you get to draw a card, right? And from here, I can maybe discard the Loporrit and play the Lena, and now I've gotten myself to 3 forwards, 3 backups on my second turn. That's very strong. Now, 90% of the time, if you don't get this turn, like turn 1, turn 2, you're probably not playing the Riku. It's just really good to curve out in your initial turns, but that's like a typical combo you can do with Riku, which really makes her worth playing in curving that backup line out like that and getting your Furion online as quick as possible. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was I wanted to talk about X-Star. So I had mentioned when we were talking about X-Star at the beginning, when X-Star gets played onto the field, X-Star has 3 auto abilities associated with it. You have an enter the field, dull freeze all the forwards, you're other than 3. You have play a fire or ice forward of 3 or less, and you have choose a forward, deal 3,000 damage for each cost 3 you control. Now, you can put those abilities on the stack in any order you want, and that's important. Now, most of the time, you will, I always say, when I play X-Star, I'll play X-Star, and I'll say X-Star effects resolving top to bottom. That's saying that the dull freeze will be happening first, the play of forward will happen second. Where's a forward at cost 3? Where's a ward? The play will happen second, and then the damage will happen last. That way, you get the most damage out of X-Star. The other reason you usually want to resolve top to bottom, you want the dull freeze to resolve first in case you're summoning a Furion off of X-Star, so he does not get dull frozen. So it would be play X-Star, resolving top to bottom, dull freeze happens, free play happens, then damage happens. And so your Furion or your Zidane gets to stay safe whenever you play these. There's not a lot of examples where you would want, maybe the damage to happen before the dull freeze or the play to happen before the damage or something. But just know that that is an option you can do. You can say, like, maybe I'm just hypotheticals here. I don't know where the use case would be, but like maybe your opponent has Ferris on board and Ferris says when she's dealt damage, she gets to ping it back. So maybe you say, I want to do the damage first because the damage doesn't matter here. I just don't want my Furion to get pinged with Ferris damage. Or Zidane or something. So you say, do the damage first, then I'll play my thing. That way, that counter trigger goes on the stack before Furion's on the board. Again, these are super niche scenarios, but just it's important to know that you are in control of how these effects resolve. It just will help you a lot if you tell your opponent most of the time you want to go top to bottom, because that's usually the most efficient way that you can do it. Another thing to note about X-Star, just a small little ruling stipulation, but no matter how you resolve these effects, X-Star must choose a forward and deal out 3,000 damage for each forward cost 3 you control. So even if I play X-Star and I'm resolving the damage last, I have to pick my target on activation. So before like this ward hits the board, you would say, play X-Star, give me this cloud, and we'll have Riku on board. So you would say, this is my opponent's cloud, I have my guys, and I would say, play X-Star, X-Star, resolving top to bottom, choosing cloud for damage. Now we dull freeze, we play, and then cloud takes the damage. Just know that you don't choose when the effect is happening. You choose immediately on activation. Another important card to talk about here, just some small niche scenarios, but you may run into them. Remember that Mog here can put himself into the break zone, so your opponent can't search. This is useful, like I said, to be doing if, say, it's a mirror match and my opponent plays Larsa. I can go, oh, respond to Larsa by breaking Mog. They can't search for a 4 to cost 4 more, right? It's also useful in cases like, we talked about Brynhildr, how Brynhildr deals 5,000 damage to something, and then they draw a card when that forward dies. If they target Mog for Brynhildr, you can use Mog's effect to sacrifice him, and then he didn't take the damage from Brynhildr. He didn't die to Brynhildr. He took himself out of the game. They don't get the draw card. That could be used in many scenarios of things that have to target something. Mog can blank himself out of the game, and sometimes you can avoid effects like that and stuff. So remember that tagging out your... And another thing to remember with Mog is it does not hurt to tag this guy out of the game, right? There's almost no reason to not tag this guy out of the game. The only time you wouldn't want to is like if you're blocking something, if I'm like blocking this Cloud and I really for some reason need that 4,000 damage onto Cloud, if I tag out the Mog on the block, Cloud wouldn't take 4,000 damage, right? That's like the only case you'd ever want to. But again, remember that it's like if your opponent has a forward and they attack with it, you can block with the Mog and then in response tag it out, and the attack has been blocked and your opponent can't search for the rest of the turn. So if they ever play something like Phoenix, deal 9,000 damage to Mog, just tag it out. It literally costs you nothing to tag this thing out. So if it's going to die anyways, use it. It may stop your opponent's plays. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is give me a hand. Sure, that's a hand of cards. So a lot of times we're gonna look at a card like Kuchu Lane. So you may, and a lot of people may do this, is you play your Tyvis, you go to search for something, and your opponent may Kuchu Lane the Tyvis. They're saying you could search for your warrior, but he'll be nulled by the time he gets to your hand, so you can't free play it. So remember that you can, in response to the Kuchu Lane, use Tyvis's effect to play, and then you'd play, and then play, and then Kuchu Lane would resolve, and then you'd search for any warrior you want. So sometimes, if you can, it's good to keep a warrior in your hand as a backup when you're playing that. Sometimes you can't help it, you know. Sometimes your hand, sometimes you've got backup Larsa, and your hand is Cloud, Phoenix, Lena, and Loperit, right? And it's like, I don't have a warrior, but I'm playing the Tyvis, you know. But a lot of the times, if you can hold a warrior in your hand, they're gonna think that you're going to get the only warrior you have to play, so you can just respond by playing another. It's a good way to get around plays like that and to keep those kinds of things in mind when playing Tyvis. I think that is the majority of little tiny just plays and stuff I wanted to talk about. Simple combos and how to start your game and how to mulligan for good hands. Now I want to get into specific matchups, and we could talk about what you should do when matching up against some of the more popular decks being played in the current meta. So the first matchup I want to talk about is the mirror match. If you are playing against another Warriors deck. And this is one I wanted to talk about first because it's one that I see a lot of people kind of make mistakes when going against the mirror match. and it comes kind of in falling for patterns. You don't want to fall into the same pattern. Like I said, you ideally every game want a Larsa, Tyvis, Mog, etc., etc., etc. The mirror is where it gets a little different. And I see people make this mistake a lot of the times. So, you draw your opening hand, doot, blah, and blah, right? So your instinct, and you're playing against warriors. So your instinct would be, I'm going first, so I'm going to discard 2 cards. You'd probably keep the Amat, but you would discard 2 cards, and play the Larsa, right? And then you'll go get your Tyvis. And so, like I said, then you would go to your next. They would do their turn. They might play a Larsa and search for Tyvis as well. So your instinct would tell you that they have a Larsa as well. Your instincts would say, well, they're going to want to play Tyvis and search for a warrior. And I see this a lot where people go, okay, I'm going to discard 2. I'm going to play Tyvis. I'm going to search for Mog. I'm going to play Mog and draw a card and go ahead. Now I could stop their Tyvis search. And this is like my good typical opener. I'm good. The problem with this kind of opener is your opponent gets to do this. They get to go draw for turn, Clive, Prime, blow this up, combat, attack, blow this up. And now you're in a crap position. They just blew your opening out of the water. You lost one of your most valuable forwards in Tyvis, and now you start your turn on 1 backup, and they still have this, which now you need to not only, we're going to draw for turn, and now you see, I've got this as my hand, and that's not a good way to deal with a free. And now you're kind of in a crap position. So what I always say when going against the mirror match is the only way I'd recommend going for this opener is if you already have a Mog in hand. That way you can go play Tyvis, search, where's he at? You can search for a second Tyvis and then play the Mog. That way, if they blow you out with Clive Ifrit, when it comes back to your turn, you can, go Tyvis, search, Agstar, play Ward, blow this up, go ahead. That is the only time I would recommend going for a Tyvis Mog play in the mirror, is if you have a Mog in hand, allowing you to search a second Tyvis off of him, guaranteeing you get to keep it. What I usually like to recommend is you want to go for the value in the mirror match. And so what you're kind of wanting to look for maybe here is, maybe I do Larsa and I search for the Tyvis, right? And this is in my hand. And so then I draw for turn, and maybe from here, instead of playing the Tyvis on 1 backup, I go all that, discard this, and play Edgar and play Lena, and then pass. And you want them to make the first move so you can maybe Clive Ifrit them back. But even if they don't make the first move, now you're playing Tyvis on 3 backups, which is a lot more efficient in playing the Tyvis. And then from here, I would recommend you then go to the Tyvis and you search for Yuzuki. And you play Yuzuki. Because now they cannot Clive Ifrit you back, because Yuzuki negates the damage. And the only way they get out of this board state is by having Kuchulain. So by establishing your 3 backups, then Tyvis, then Yuzuki, you're putting yourself way ahead on resources and making it really difficult for them to remove your board in turn. You don't want to get greedy here. If you play the Tyvus on 1 and you lose it, you have a much harder time building back your board than if you can get yourself to 3 first, and then you can start doing this. Something else I like to do here is get the 3 backups, but also just play a raw Mog. Don't play the Tyvus, just play the Mog. Because this stops them from playing their Tyvus, but it also makes it really inefficient for them to like 5 Ifrit it back, because you're gonna pay that much just to remove a Mog, because Mog draws a card on entry. So Mog is a very cheap forward that they almost guaranteed will be paying more to remove it than you paid to put it on the field, thus giving you another turn to build up more resources while they're wasting theirs trying to get rid of this Mog. So those are kind of the tips I have for the mirror match. I think it's, in my opinion, a lot of the nuance of the mirror match comes from your opener. And I think having a more reserved opener will win you more games in the long run. If you get greedy and try and blow your load too early, this deck you play this deck, you know how many options you have to blow up boards. So you're just opening up that risk for yourself. So keep those things in mind. Try going Tyvus Yuzuki the next time you do a mirror match. You'll find a lot of success in it, I'm sure. So the next one I want to talk about is Mono Earth. Mono Earth is it's a pretty favorable matchup for you a lot of the time. Your game plan is go fast. You want to try and go as fast as possible. And this is a matchup where I really, really like Riku, because against Mono Earth, you're able to like go turn 1, discard those, and play Larsa, right? And again, you can go turn 2, you discard 2 cards to play Tyvus. I'm not going to discard 2 cards because I just want to use these as an example. You would play Tyvus, and then you'd search the Riku, play the Edgar, play the Zidane, or the Furion, swing, draw, because they probably went 1 backup turn 1, right? And now they probably went 2 backups to 3 backups. Then you draw for turn here. They're at 1 damage, and then you could like crack this Edgar, play this Zidane, disrupt to them, and then take them to 2, 3, 4, 5 points of damage. And they only have 2, 3 backups on the board. Now they'll be forced into using Shantoto, or they lose the game, which is where then you could just play the Amat, cancel the Shantoto, and then you win the game. You have to just go very quick. And that's where these 2 cards come in handy. Because being able to Edgar into Furion to start getting early points of damage, or go into Zidane so you can start taking the backups out of their hand and making it really hard for them to even try to get in the game while still having that hasty body getting in points of damage. There are worlds where I, against Mono Earth, would consider with like, I don't know, a hand like this, I would consider just going, you know what? Discard 2, turn 1 to just go Edgar Zidane. Take 2 backups out of their hand, because you'd get 1 out of their hand on entry and another one on the swing, and you're already establishing damage. And then next turn, you know, you could go this Tyvus into Mog, drawing a card, swinging for another point, taking another backup out of their hand, and possibly preventing the search with the Mog, so that, again, they're playing really inefficient, and then next turn, they're at 2 points of damage. You know, you could go, this would be actually really weird, because you'd want to keep the Amat in your hand. Because you could even here just go 3, 4, 5. Just to keep the... I was going to say you could discard these 2 and play the Clive. but you probably want to keep the Amat in hand. Like I said, for Mono Earth, you want to go really fast, and if you can get into Amat, you want to hold it, because once you start applying that pressure, you're basically forcing them to Shantoto. And if you can force them to dump hand to play Shantoto and you cancel it, you probably win the game. So yeah, always remember that with this deck is it's a game of knowing when to apply pressure. And that's kind of the name of the game here, is you're playing a mid-range deck. So you need to remember that you're playing a game between trying to build resources and pressuring your opponent. And knowing when to pressure them and when to pull back on that pressure is really important here. Warriors is a deck that I feel is more successful the more you know what your opponent is trying to do, you know, which is where, like I said, knowing that they're playing, for example, Mono Earth, you know you might want to disrupt their backups with Zidane. You know that some of their backups are trying to search other backups. And you know that they are going to die a horrible death if you come out of the gate swinging. So knowing what your opponent is trying to do is really important in winning games with a mid-range deck like this. So another deck to talk about is Warriors of Light, or Refia. Now that is a tough matchup for you. It really is. That is a matchup where you will not win the long game. I promise you, you will not win the long game. So you kind of have two options in the Refia matchup. Option one is go as fast as humanly possible. I mean, you are trying to go. I've had games where we do, we do this. With the backups there, of course. Where's the Edgar? You know, I've had games where we do this, and then next turn, we're, cracking the Edgar, playing the Zidane, playing the Clive, and just going boom, 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 and trying to win the game on turn two. These are real games you can have with this deck, especially against Refia. This is risky, because while you can end the game before they even get set up, they do play a lot of EX bursts. A Brynhilder will blow your Furion right out of the water. A Kuchulain can take the haste away from your Clive, making it unable to swing. So it is a risky game plan, but getting them to 5 or 6 damage as early as possible does give you windows where you can just draw for turn, and you can draw a Clive, and you could just Clive, prime, swing, and try and get it to connect, Now, your other option, then going as fast as humanly possible, is playing what I like to call Turbo Mog. Refia wants to search. It wants every backup in that deck is searching except for Cryo, right? Like, they're playing Sarah FFL. They're playing King Tycoon. So you can have games where you go, where's Tybus? Where you go, I had a game at the Texas Materia Cup where I went Tybus, Mog, and then they played a Searcher, and I broke the Mog, and then I drew for turn, and it was Mog, and I played the Mog again, and I played Elena, right? And then they tried to search, and I broke the Mog, and then I draw for turn, and then I Lena special, and I put the Mog back on the board, right? Like, and then they try to search, and you do it again, because you are trying your best to not only keep their start as inefficient as possible, because yeah, then they can get to 4 backups, but then they might have 0 cards in hand. And then they are relying on top decking exactly what they need to get out of this situation. And that's when you might be able to just start slamming down these hasty bodies and taking them from, 2 to dead. Because that's the scary thing about Refia, is you unfortunately don't have the luxury a lot of the time in this deck. You want to take them from 2 damage to dead, because they have a lot of damage 3 effects in Ferris and Arc. But again, with the amount of bursts they have and the limited hasty bodies you have in this deck, you don't really have that luxury a lot of the time. So sometimes you will have to take them to 4 or 5 damage and then try and finish it. That's where having things like a Mott can come in handy to stop the Arcs or the Ferrises. If you are going to push them over the damage 3 threshold, you want to have an answer to be able to cancel whatever damage 3 effect they have on the return. This is another matchup also where if I have this in my opening hand, Edgar and Zidane, this is a matchup where I will say I'm discarding 2 cards to play Edgar Zidane. Because if you can disrupt a Refia player's starting hand bad enough, they may never come back to the game ever again, What do you take with the Zidane? That's kind of subjective, I'd love to hear people. So here's the question I'm going to pose to people, because I have this question all the time, and I know it's kind of subjective, but if you play Zidane against Warriors of Light, do you prioritize the forwards or do you prioritize the backups in their hand? It's a real honest question. You could take the backups out of their hand, and that could disrupt them slowly, but they also play like 20 backups. You could take the forwards out of their hand, and they could curve out their backups and then do nothing with them because you took all the forwards out of the game. Some of that's situational, If I look at their hand with Zidane and it's 4 backups and a forward, I'm taking the forward, because taking a backup does nothing there. But let me know what you think about that, because that's honestly a real consideration, I'd say. But yeah, those are the tips I have for the Refia matchup. It's a tough matchup. It really is. That deck is annoying how resilient it is once it passes damage 3. And it is difficult to take it from 2 to dead. So, best of luck with that matchup. It's one that I've practiced a lot, and it does take a lot of just knowing what cards they could be getting into and knowing what counter cards you need. Having Cuchulains for the Refias or the Ferrises to slow them down, having Amots for the Arcs and the Ferris Surges and stuff. It's important to just play the match, but keep those things in mind. So the next matchup I want to talk about is Water Lightning. Now, the Water Lightning Monsters deck that's out there right now, it can be a tough matchup for this deck. What a lot of the times it can come down to, I know this is going to shock and surprise you. I'm going to pull this card out of the deck again. Mog. Part of the cornerstone of the Water Lightning deck is they want to play Realm, and they want to search and play 2 monsters onto the field. If you can do the same, if you can play the Turbo Mog game, you can, again, keep them really slow, right? This is a world where I would say you can go, turn 1, Larsa, get Tybus, and then maybe discard 2 cards and play Mog turn 1. So, depends if you're going first or second and what they do. If you're going first, you're just going to do this and pass. They're probably not discarding 3 for Realm turn 1. They might, but you're not going to discard your whole hand to get this Mog out in case of that. They're probably going to open with a backup, because they're doing the same thing. They want to play a 5 cost on curve, Realm. So they may play a Merlwib turn 1 to search the Realm. In that case, the Realm is coming, you can go Tybus Mog, right? So you want to keep that in mind. But if you can do this, killing this Mog is a little more difficult because they need the monsters on board as part of their removal. So it can help you a lot to just establish this Mog and stop the realm searches. And playing Turbo Mog. The other card that can be really important in that matchup is he's not in my stack of cards here, but it's Cloud. Because not only can you break monsters, which is the obvious pick for Cloud, but removing 2 cards from their break zone from the game, do not underestimate Water, Lightning, Lightning. Lightning can take you from 2 to dead if they have the right setup and you're not careful. Get them out of the game. That card is a scary win con for that deck. So play Cloud, break a monster, remove 2 lightnings from the game, is a huge swing in your favor in this deck. So keep that in mind. The lightnings in the break zone, they're terrifying. You want to get them out of the game. So the final matchup I want to talk about is Yuna. Now, Yuna, that matchup comes down to, a lot of the time comes down to one. So there's a few things with the Yuna matchup. One, you have Axstar, okay? Because Yuna wants to dull stuff to stop you from doing stuff, right? Or dull stuff to dull your stuff. Axstar can dull freeze their whole board, buying you a turn or 2 to get set up. Another thing is getting Ifrit, getting this guy set up as quick as possible, honestly, is very helpful in that matchup. Because now they have to spend 2 of theirs just to keep him down. Because they cannot let this thing swing, right? But also, he has a special. And Yuna can't tax specials. So being able to just constantly sit here and go, special your dude. You can't do anything about it, over and over again, really, really just slows them down a lot. This also depends on the variant of Yuna, because if they're playing like the category 4 variant, you really want to play Turbo Mog for a bit, because you want to try and keep them from using the Earth Cecil to tag out into a bigger Cecil. You can hold the Amat as well for the Wind Cecil, because you don't, if they play for the Wind Cecil. Sometimes against this deck, they're going to go into the Opus 2 one that, doesn't take damage or whatever. But if they go into the Wind one, you want to have the Amat for it. But, so there's lots of flavors of Yuna out there. So you just kind of have to know which one you're playing against and adapt to it as you will. But you have a lot of options. This deck has a lot of options to deal with certain things. Be it a threatening body like this, the dull freeze on Axstar, or even just stopping some of their initial searching with Mog can go a long way. And then at that point, it's just paying attention to if they can afford to tax your stuff. Another thing that's really good in that matchup is playing something like Ultima Weapon, because that's 2 auto abilities on the stack. So it's hard for them to tax, they'd have to tax both individually. So just having a body that can do 2 different things, Axstar doing 3 different things, makes it a little harder for them to use the tax effect. Just giving you a little more advantage in those matchups. That's one I would suggest practicing, because it's not a very straightforward matchup. But like I said, you have a lot of answers in your deck. You have Kuchulain. Like just turn off the Yuna. But yeah, so that's about all I have for it. Like I said, it's a very, very powerful mid-range deck, but it's all in the hands of the player, and it's knowing what you want to do and more importantly, what your opponent wants to do so you can adapt to that situation. So you know when to attack, when to apply pressure, those sorts of things. So I hope this kind of gave you a good rundown on Warriors, gets you started. I hope you learned something about the deck. This is one of the most fun decks I've played in Final Fantasy in a long time. And if you haven't tried it out, go try it out. It's super fun and I highly recommend it. So until the next one, everybody, take care.